So let me begin by really just asking the four who are panelists if, as you heard tonight's comments, there were comments that you wanted to make or questions that you wanted to raise. If you would just feel free to offer those up.
I would just thank everybody for being here, and I loved Jihad Turk and Dr. Evelyn's presentation. And I believe that we have, as they both mentioned, a lot more in common than we often realize. And so I work mostly with evangelical Christian communities, churches, and schools. And when they discover that, it's a huge step towards moving away from fear and into love.
Can you just say, before we move on, do you mind just saying a little bit more about how this even began in your life?
Right, yeah. So I was part of Saddleback Church for a really long time, and we started reaching out to local Muslim communities. And at some point, I did it outside of the church umbrella. I made a friend. Her name is Sundus. And her and I were the same age. And sometimes people, when they see our picture, they think we're twins because we kind of look alike. We have the exact same age and very similar interests. And so her and I became really good friends and started writing about our friendship on a blog that we call Miss Understanding. It's kind of a play on words. And pretty soon we got people saying, I want a Muslim friend like yours. And so they were all saying, where can I find a Sundus? And her Muslim friends were asking her, I want a Christian friend like Michal. And so we decided that we would host what we call Two Faiths, One Friendship mixers, where we bring Muslims and evangelical Christians together, and it's basically kind of speed dating for a friend of the other faith. We play icebreaker games, and it's, as Evelyn was saying, she was at one that we had yesterday, 190 people signed up to come. And people love it because it's a space where they can come and make a friend.
Thank you very much. Do you want to offer a comment or make a reflection?
Yes, definitely. I do want to thank Fuller, I think, for taking this opportunity to actually invite a Muslim woman to speak for herself. So I really do appreciate that a lot. And I've been to one of the mixers also, and along with I have to say, with my 10-year-old, who was just amazed, who was just so happy to see people just interested and just wanted to talk to him. He really struggles with actually the fact that he can't talk to friends in public school about religion. And he just finds it odd that why people are not proud of who they are or don't know who they are. So he really enjoyed the mixer. He really enjoyed it, and he made a lot of good friends, and he still talks about it. So that's really amazing. A lot of what I do is through the education. I talk to students starting at seventh graders. As you know, a lot of seventh graders study a chapter on Islam in their book, same as high schoolers in 10th grade and colleges and universities. And I think we really cannot underestimate the importance of just meeting a Muslim, asking them questions, and having them just talk about what they believe. I've been to so many different classrooms in so many different neighborhoods around Southern California. I drive up to an hour and a half to any of these presentations just to kind of meet people and see what questions they have, and it's amazing. And a lot of times what I come across is that even when a teacher would tell me, I have a class of honor students, I need you to challenge them. I need you to bring up controversial issues. I never take it for granted that I really understand what the teacher talks about. So I asked them, I said, what are you talking about? It's like, talk about the hijab. I said, well, I thought you were talking about politics or ISIS or something, but I mean, something so basic. I'm like, well, that's part of my presentation. And I meet honor students who just when it comes to any information about Muslims, they're really not honor students. It's really sad. I mean, just basic questions about, Muslims, what country has the most populated Muslim country in the world? And I'm talking about country, and I'm talking about 12-year-olds. And they're like, Africa. I'm like, no, we're talking about country. And they're like, Asia. So it's really, it is.
Geography's never been one of our national strengths.
I really like the fact that a lot of teachers see the point and appreciate and really apologize even at the end. It's like, well, to be truthful to you, you're the first Muslim I meet as a teacher. So it's very true for a lot of these students. And that's why I do what I do. And I really think we can't underestimate education and just dialogue and talking directly with people of other faith and asking them questions directly. I tell people, it's like, if you want to learn about anybody, go up, find those people and ask questions. Don't try to find it online. Don't try to ask other people who don't believe, and don't understand or don't know what other people believe and try to kind of, come up with your own conclusions. Just go to the source and talk to people. And there is a lot a lot to say about that.
Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank you for hosting us and appreciate the wonderful presentations by Dr. Weizsäcker and Professor Jihad Turk. And your remarks are really wonderful in the sense that they open a channel of communication. And one thing I remember, George Bernard Shaw said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So it is a never-ending process. The dialogue is beginning, not concluding in any way. So the questions you raise are really the quintessential and most important questions of our times. And in terms of this dialogue, and the debate that's going on across the country, I came across something interesting a few weeks ago. Just about 3 weeks ago, there's a show on KFI called the Jesus Christ Show. Does anybody know about it? I don't know. I hope that individual is not a graduate of Fuller, but it's actually a good show. And 3 weeks ago, a gentleman calls him and says, in Syria, these Muslims are killing a lot of Christians. I want to go fight. I want to go fight these Muslims. This is just his basic knowledge. And this gentleman, the host of the show, he calls him Jesus Christ. He's Jesus Christ. I mean, it's something he uses to inspire people and doing good things in life. He said, let me tell you something. Go look up and read about Islam. Read about it. Read about the people, the billions of people in the world that are Muslims. So go befriend a Muslim, and you will see how these people have helped build this nation, America, today in such a wonderful way. And they're part and parcel of our society. And I think that is the message that I see resonating here, and I'm really, really appreciative of this phenomenal support for a program and dialogue like this. So once again, thank you for having us.
Thank you very
much. Well, it's a shame that it takes something like 9/11 and San Bernardino and ISIS to get us together to do something like this. But going back to 9/11, that's where really Fuller became much more involved in dialoguing with Muslims. And actually, we put out 4 different books at that time with Muslims on our work together. And I would hope that we could do something similar at the present time. If I could just give, to go back to 9/11, Roberta, my wife, and I were in Peshawar, Pakistan, which was Osama bin Laden's main conduit to the world at the time. In fact, my wife had just seen him in a restaurant a few months earlier than that. And our friends, our Muslim friends, and Muslims that we had never met just came to us to tell how sorry they were that this had happened. As we went out of the country, complete strangers, each place we went, Muslims again expressed their concern to us. Exactly 1 year later, we could go back to Afghanistan and Pakistan, where we had been. And I'd just like to describe 9/11, 2002, exactly 1 year later. In the plane as we were flying, it was prayer time, and the Muslim passengers prayed, tried to do their ablutions in the bathrooms, which is quite a trick with these little sinks up there, but and then prayed in the hall, again praying for their safety in this case. We then flew over the western part of Iran, where Sufi poets like Jami wrote a poem, "Seek healing from the Christ, for he from this and every fault can set you free," Muslim Sufi poet. We then landed in Dubai. We had a few hours in between planes, and so we went to the old Mud Maktoum family palace. And there is where, in the living room, is where they had served thousands of cups of cups of coffee and hospitality. We went next door to the madrasa there, where they again taught people to live a civilized life. We then got on the plane, and my neighbor beside me spent the whole time with his feet up, his shoes off, his feet up, just rocking back and forth, reciting the Quran for his protection. And then we landed in Peshawar as the call of the minaret come to salvation. And so there are the two sides of people who call themselves Muslims. And what we need to do is to find out how we can understand and how we can be a help and be helped in these situations.
Thank you. You're an agreeable lot. You've all had very significant and personal, extended experiences in the kind of conversations that we're having tonight, and in the kind of commitment and concern for Christian and Muslim friendships and relationships and understanding. I can't help but believe that along the way there have been some relationships that have been harder than others for that to be achieved. And when you've been in those kinds of relationships with the person of another faith, Muslims with Christians or Christians with Muslims, and you may have been tempted to give up on the friendship or on the relationship or on the conversation, what's critical in those moments? I'm so helped by your comment about being willing to have the courage to ask questions, to go and directly engage. What happens when it's not going well and you're trying to figure out how to move through this? Is this just the normal part of human communication, or is there something distinct about overcoming such challenges between Christian and Muslim friends? How would you describe it?
I can talk about some challenging times, because I served as an imam or religious director at a large mosque, and in that capacity, we and the Islamic Center of Southern California had emphasized the importance of civic engagement in general and interfaith relations in particular. And so when we were approached by an unnamed evangelical community, we began a 3-year engagement with that community. And this relationship was in the spirit of improved Muslim-Christian relations. And so we were, feeling misunderstood. And so when we had a lifeline from this community that in many ways we felt were the ones that were at the head of misperceiving us, we were very responsive to that. However, the relationship was meant to be kept out of the media, and when word leaked to the media unintentionally, there was really a denial of the relationship, almost in its entirety, from the church, and it was challenging because pressure came. The reason why, and I understand the wisdom of not wanting it to go to the public because of the negative perception within the evangelical community of Muslims in particular, when there was a notion that this church was in communication with, dialogue, partnership, whatever the terminology that was used, there was a lot of pushback from within evangelical communities against this church, and claims of Chrislam were labeled against the leader, and which is Christian Islam mixed, right? Some kind of syncretic theology or untrue, adulterated theology from the evangelical perspective, and so there was a kind of a denial of the relationship, and we felt a little bit, hurt, thrown under the bus a little bit, and it's hard sometimes when you're trying to move the needle and do work within the community on these sensitive issues. Sometimes your biggest challenge is your own community in the process, and so we nonetheless we endured, and we didn't give up on the relationship, and we're still in communication, but we've reduced our expectations as to what will be made public by these efforts, and we've gone in different directions. But that's one of the challenges, is when you engage publicly, there's posturing, and then there's the pushback you get from your own community.
Did it feel to you like the evangelical community you were relating to understood that and owned that they had done that, or was that part of the problem?
Members of the community, yes. The senior leadership, no.
It's very challenging.
Yeah.
Others might want to share.
Yeah, Sooners and I often tell a story where we would butt heads, if you will, not in a strong way, but just kind of like we got a misunderstanding, and so then we feel we can't really call our blog misunderstanding if we have our own misunderstandings. What has been interesting to us is that sometimes if there is a tension, which has happened very, very little, but when it does happen, sometimes it seems to latch on to a theological discussion when it's really just an interpersonal problem. And so we were not listening to each other carefully, understanding each other carefully enough, but then it manifested itself in this like theological thing that it really wasn't about ultimately. And so I think it's what we've seen when we bring Muslims and Christians into friendship. We recognize, okay, people understand we need to be friends. Once they're there, they need a lot of training on, well, what do you do with the tough questions? We call them lingering questions that are in the back of your mind. You know, there's a sense of suspicion, or from your own community, your own fellow Christians will be like, well, why are you friends with them? And, you know, Muslims will get the same thing, like, don't you know they want to try to convert you? You know, all these things. And so we have an open discussion about that right away. And so as soon as we've introduced people into friendship, we say, come to training, and we're going to talk about these things very openly, like what are the things that you can bump into, and we want to avoid for that to happen, and give you the tools when it does happen. How do you deal with each other respectfully and in an understanding way?
Do you find that the threshold of training is a little too high, or do they welcome that just naturally because they've already taken the first
yeah,
steps?
I think in the last year we've had 350 people that we've introduced into friendship with each other, and 100 of them came to training. And sometimes people come a couple times just to friendship stuff, and then they realize once they start clicking with somebody, I need a little bit of training. And then they come anyways, or they approach us separately. And so we're thinking of putting some of that into writing and maybe some video curriculum that it can be used by anybody from a personal perspective.
I mean, it's encouraging that a
Yeah.
third of the people are actually willing to go through training, but it's also
Absolutely.
an indication that 2/3 of the people find
Right.
it hard, right?
Yes.
And I think it's, in many cases, a common human experience to want to find friendship
Right.
homogeneously, right?
Yeah.
And this is clearly across a Muslim-Christian difference that can be a challenge for people. So it's complicated. you know?
Yeah. It's a process too. I think there's so many steps to
Right.
interfaith relations.
Yes.
Where for some people, just to even see you post on Facebook, hey, I have a Muslim friend. Look, we look cute together, right? That already for them is a huge thing. Like, whoa, you can be friends. And they might watch you for about, I've done that for
Stalkers.
7 years, just watching you. And then after 7 years, like, I've been watching you build friendships with Muslims. This is amazing. Now I want to make a Muslim friend too after 7 years of watching you. So I think we have to have patience with people, that it's a process and there's a lot involved.
Wow.
There, there's one other example that I wanted to speak to, and it's not here in the U.S. context, it's at the international level. One of your professors who's phenomenal, Professor Martin Akkad, he's on a number of occasions brought students to the Islamic Center and arranged for some engagement between Fuller and the Islamic Center community. But we were fortunate enough to be at a closed-door roundtable discussion of seminary presidents and leaders. He's not president, as you know. You're the president. But he...
But if he would like to be the president, I would...
in Austria last October. So we were invited there by an international interfaith dialogue, religious dialogue center based there, that brought, and this roundtable brought together seminary presidents and leaders from Muslim and Christian seminaries in Arabic-speaking countries. And I was brought, even though Claremont is not an Arabic-speaking town yet, because we're in partnership with a Christian seminary and a Jewish seminary. And so there was some, they wanted to explore how it is, curricularly speaking, Christian seminaries and Muslim seminaries in the Arabic-speaking Muslim world can incorporate into their curriculum a knowing of one another. And what was fascinating is we have large institutions. One of the presidents there presided over an institution. It wasn't just a seminary. It had 80,000 students, but the seminary was, many thousands strong in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We had another one, also tens of thousands strong in Jordan. We had seminaries in Morocco and major Muslim countries, and also Christian seminaries from across the spectrum, Coptic, et cetera, and mainline Protestant, et cetera, throughout the Muslim world. And none of them, and we had one of the gentlemen from Jordan said, we don't have anywhere in our curriculum where we actually interact with Christians. It's not even part of our experience. If you can go and be, and he put it this way in a sort of a mea culpa moment as well. He said, let's be honest. And he's talking with all of these seminary heads. He said, let's be honest. Our students are part of the problem. We're not preparing them to be in conversation with the other. And we have exclusive truth claims. And our students come out a little bit self-righteous. And it was, but he said, but we need to change. We need to open up our seminaries to our students to the experience of interacting with, not for the purposes of just knowing enough so that we can refute the other and convert them to our way, but to know and appreciate and be in friendship and relationship with one another. So we started exploring what that might look like, how we do it here locally, and the possibility of pairing up the seminary so that the students can interact in a respectful manner. That doesn't happen, and it needs to. So that's another huge challenge.
Yeah,
in the
and
Muslim
it's a
world.
challenge for us here at Fuller. I mean, I think we have a long ways to go in that very thing. Dudley, I wonder from all of your years of experience, if you have anything that you want to share as an example of a tough patch where pressing on brought things to a better stage.
Well, I think of, when we were in Pakistan, living in Pakistan, we used to interface with the Islamic Research Institute. I was in a Christian Studies Center, which was an ecumenical one, and the Islamic Research Institute was a government-sponsored center. And we would work through all kinds of problems there between our communities and in understanding. What was interesting to me is one day, it was when the East and West Pakistan were breaking apart and East Pakistan was becoming Bangladesh. And one of the members of the Islamic Center who was from East Pakistan or Bangladesh came to me and asked me if I would critique his statement of faith, which was a number of pages. And I said, why are you asking a Christian to do it? And he said, in the present circumstance, from our interaction with you Christians, I think you're going to give me a fairer critique of my statement. And I think this is something that could be built on from both sides. Are we developing those relationships where will somebody from the other faith come to us, or will we go to somebody from the other faith because the relationship is such that we feel we'll get a fairer critique from that person?
That's a great picture of trust and wisdom. That's amazing. Did you have anything else for anyone here?
In high school, Mondays used to be the toughest day for me in my junior year because I had this classmate, a friend, who used to go to his Korean church on Sundays. So he would come equipped with questions. And then he would probe. It's like, why did your prophet kill so many Jews? Why did your people kill so many? And I would counter back. I'm like, why did you guys, what about the Crusades? So the level of maturity of conversation at that time was what it was. And just one day he's like, your prophet married a child. Like, shoot, now I have to look that up. I didn't have internet, whether I'm a 90s graduate. So So in a way, I think, in tough conversations, you do get educated. But as conversations mature, fast forward modern days, internet, Facebook, this guy from Tennessee who's befriended me on Facebook for quite some years. And anytime I post something, it just becomes people write essays on those posts. It's just debates after debates. It has a lot to do with race issues, political issues, religious issues. I mean, I took the risk of saying one day that I know a thing or two about Armageddon, and it became a huge debate. But I got to a point one day that I just wanted to unfriend him. And it just was, I was about to do that. He posted something. He's like, despite our disagreements, I have a tremendous amount of respect for this man. He was referring to me. And he said, because 3-4 years ago, my wife's mother was sick, very ill at the hospital. And my wife was distressed and she was crying. And Faisal, you were the one who called her and you consoled her and gave her advice. And she let her mother go and her mother passed away. And it was him reminding me of that just impressed upon me. I'm like, the human touch, the value of that human touch. I mean, you can't put a price on that. And then, by the way, him just saying that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff he was saying, sort of resisting his ideas and concepts, or whatever comes out of Tennessee these days. I was actually more inclined to be open-minded. And I really cherish that. I really appreciate that he did that.
Right. Really seeing each other as people. Any comments for you?
Yeah, I think that when I was hearing you speak, what I recalled, I think this one is working. Thank you. I recall that some of the most challenging times were actually with my friends, my evangelical friends, in terms of, because there is not a long history of Muslim-Christian relations between evangelicals. And so it's kind of a history in the making. Because most of the time when we would encounter each other before, it was in the context of mission. And so for a lot of people, it's very hard to say, okay, well, why would you do dialogue? And so I remember that conversation, 3-hour conversation over coffee with that friend who said, but why do you engage? And then also him quoting, and what about the churches, in the Middle East, and especially the Muslim background, followers of Jesus coming from Islam? So all these questions came and said, why do you do? So I think what I try to explain to him is actually that we are actually, for me, it was a beautiful experience to engage in dialogue. First, that for just because I think the history of the first encounters happened like that. I mean, look at the conversation between the early Muslims and the Christian. There were very rich conversation in the first century. That's how it all started. I mean, we were in conversation with each other, and somehow I think realizing that we as evangelicals have completely drifted away from that for so long and just met for more very specific objective or planning church or do mission, but not having to give up our passion, because of course we love Jesus and we want to share it, and that's normal, that's who we are. But at the same time, there is more we can do together as evangelicals than just trying to convert someone. You know what I mean? And I think, and there's so much benefit to it, in terms of relationship building, in terms of just the good for the community in which you live, and even the knowledge. I mean, I do my theology with the questions that Muslims are asking to me. They're very pertinent questions. And that's beautiful. That's what I say to my student. It's just, listen to the questions that Muslims are asking about your text. And how do you... So I think we have something, and what I see, the good thing, what I see is that this dialogue has started. I mean, Dudley mentioned that it has started, and probably the book that was written, Peace Building Between, By and Beyond Muslim and Evangelical, were probably the first one of the kind. And it was actually at Fuller here in conversation with Muslim scholars and leaders. And so I think it's sometimes looks messy because there are many voices, many grievances, and so we have to but I think there is all those I see engaging in it find a a lot of good and positive experiences. So.
Yeah, thank you. Did you?
I think when we talk about education, I've always had an easier time in colleges and universities. I noticed that a lot of students, a lot of professors, I mean, they're there for the discussion, they're there to learn, they're there to discuss. It becomes really, I think, some of these relationships that are a little bit harder is when you're talking about public school and about younger audiences. I think the students are always very eager and they want it to be very casual. They want to ask you questions about Halloween and about, about celebrations and what do you do. And I find my toughest part is usually the administrators really not thinking that that's necessary. So one of the things I do through the Muslim Speakers Network is that we offer trainings for teachers. And I've come across principals who says, oh, but my teachers don't need that training. And you just kind of look at them. And I think realizing that this is something new and being patient, like what Mikal was saying, being patient with people. And also, I don't think they're necessarily, even when they're saying that to you, they're not necessarily really knowing what you're going to offer. They really, that material and what you're going to be talking about is completely new and unknown. And I think they just think, in the same conversation with this particular principal, for example, she'll mention to me that, oh, I've had a lot of bullying against Muslim students. Even third graders call each other, terrorists and ISIS. And but the problem is these students who don't know, not the teachers who can help them. So it's just that there is no logic behind that. It's really tough. And then when a lot of times when we're presenting in the classroom, it's the parents, some of the parents who hear about the presenters, and they're very skeptical about what you want to come and teach my child. And this is public school and the separation of church and school. There's a lot of there is a lot of issues I think that the adults bring with them that relate to the fact that this is all new, that this hasn't happened before. People haven't talked about this enough. The time with the student themselves is really, it's a time that's usually, it puts the teachers at ease to see how normal the students can discuss that, how many questions they do have, and how much they're willing to just, really speak their mind,
right.
And it's really, I think, just being patient. This one particular incident that happened with me, it's funny because I backed off a little bit, came through, the school had a couple families, refugee families, so I came to offer help through that route, through the refugee families. These are new families, if you need any help. And it wasn't until months later when another principal contacted the specific principal seeking help from her. It's like, oh, you have more diversity at your school, can you help me? And I think that's when it clicked in the principal mind. It's like, oh, no, but I have a parent who can help you. So it kind of, it's just, but it's really, right. It really just being patient and being, genuine also. I really feel like a lot of what advantage that came out of this time period and these few years of people really attempting is that we really re-examine our rhetoric and what we talk about. And it's not good enough to be PC anymore. You really have to be genuine in what you're asking and what you're sharing and what you really want to learn.
It's a great distinction. Thank you for saying it that way.